Okay. So, okay, yeah. Right, as the title says, this is a talk about HF air controls, or HF radio. So, HFC, as we pretty much most of us know it, would be something like this, where the controller looks at a screen, tracks aircraft on a radar of some scope of some type in real time, and the pilots and the controllers would talk to each other on VHF radio on AM. However, this is really limited to only about 250 miles range at max, and that's if for jets cruising about 10 kilometres or more up, 30,000 feet or higher above the surface of the Earth. And of course, as much everyone knows, most of the time VHF is line of sight, and so is limited by the Earth's curvature. And you've got control centres like this. This is at Saronic in Hampshire, which control CS space, most of it through VHF. There's another one at Ipswich in Ayrshire, which deals with the HF side as well. Okay. Now, we mostly deal with stuff over the Atlantic, so the question is here, what happens if you're flying over the open ocean? You're miles away from anywhere, any land, any sort of transmission or receive tower on the ground. And also, there can be occasions, certainly if you're flying over land, where VHF communication is not very economical. For example, a lot of airports and control centres over Africa, that cover Africa, shut down at night. So you've got places where aircraft need to communicate with an air traffic control centre a long way away. Now the answer is using a frequency or shortwave radio, which the signals of which bounce off the will get reflected off the ionosphere, and thereby giving the over-horizon capabilities that you need. And these signals can go for several thousand kilometres, as the picture indicates down there. The frequencies generally you find are mostly medium frequencies, so the lower, basically anything between 2 and at the very most 20 megahertz. Usually most of the communications are below 14 megs, so really part of the medium frequency spectrum as well. But even though this has happened, there's still a lot of traffic aircraft on HF, even in the transatlantic, which you think would be the most advanced, are still using HF to a great extent. Okay, so just a bit of history about radio for aircraft going across the pond. So we're looking at the European side of the Atlantic, really, in this case. So just before World War II, we have some flyboat services, and these used wireless telegraphy, basically Morse code, and the planes needed a radio officer. And the station, and it's still the case today, is at Bangor in the Republic of Ireland. After the war, the commercial services ruined, and that's when you start having voice communications coming on board, and that's through amplitude modulation, AM. And so you go from the flying boat era, the clippers, and then you get post warrior, which is sort of like the Strata Cruisers and the Bristol Britannias. That's sort of the when AM was really dominant. And when you get into the jet era in the late 60s, with the 707s and the DC-8s and all that sort of stuff flying the Atlantic, you start to get single sideband coming on board. and that became the norm in 1968, and still the case today. And just with regard to the European side of the Atlantic air traffic control side, it's a funny situation that the controllers are in Prestwick in Scotland, but the people talking to the pilots are actually radio operators, and they're based in Shannon and Ballygorrin, in the southwest of Ireland, and hence you have the name of the station Shanwick. So you often hear them. The people that are speaking to the planes will not be making the decisions on flight levels, tracks, etc. Will consult someone in Scotland before coming back to the aircraft. Now today there is relatively little voice traffic, and most of things like route clearances, aircraft doing position reports, etc., are done by data link. I think a lot of you may have heard of a CPDLC control pilot data link, and most of that is conducted through satellite, though some of that is through HFDL, high frequency data link. Some airlines do use that, and you can hear the squibbles of that on radio. And just talking about the level of traffic we're dealing with, looking at well north of 2,000 flights a day. So it's busy airspace, and when you don't have radar, it's quite tricky. So look at the nature of oceanic air traffic control. Like I was saying, the aircraft cannot really be tracked by radar, which is limited to line of sight. So what happens is they're controlled, what's called procedurally. So the controllers separate aircraft essentially based on pilots giving their estimates for the arrival times over particular waypoints along the flight route. And some of those waypoints have names, like Imoko, which is southwest of Land's End, and sometimes those positions are just given in terms of latitude and longitude, like 57 north, 20 west, as an example. So what happens, so looking at flights from Europe to say the States and Canada, aircraft enter oceanic airspace, still under radar coverage, so they may be flying over the Irish Republic, for instance over the landmass, and at some point over the water to the west of Ireland, they'll be handed over to the Shanwick Oceanic Control Area, OCA, at a particular point, usually 15 degrees west in longitude. So, for example, in this case, here's a flight plan. Looks like it's coming from London or somewhere. The oceanic entry point is at Denham. You see that point on the right, and then it's plots through various longitudes to an exit point in Tindu, which will be controlled by the Canadians at Gander. So this is pretty much how things used to happen until relatively recently. So, for example, this is where an aircraft will actually give its position and estimates for positions further on purely by voice. So, for example, here's an aircraft, here's Air Canada 868. So the pilot calls up Shanwick, Air Canada 868 position. And the control comes back, Air Canada 868, go ahead. Air Canada 868 is position Denham, time 1316, so that's the time in Greenwich Mean Time, or Zulu time. Level 350, it's 35,000 feet roughly. Then 20 north, so 52 north, 20 west, time 1355, 52 north, 30 west, 1450, 52 north, 0 west, 1546. And the controller will repeat that and get the confirmation from the aircraft that everything's correct. And channel control is Air Canada 868 at 30 West. That's dividing line between Shamwick's control and Gander's. Contact Gander on primary 8864, frequency in kilohertz. Backup or secondary 11279. And yeah, now most of that these days would be, certainly the position reporting of that would be done by data link. And although there are some zones, even some busy zones like the, certainly till recently, at least I haven't listened to it for a little while yet, but the Caribbean A airspace between the northeast of the USA and places like Puerto Rico, where there's a lot of over the water travel, and you're well away from land, they will still give position reports. Okay. So, what would be a typical exchange today? Basically, most of the voice traffic, really, I mean, you just have it as it's just an initial contact with the control area that you're dealing with. It could be Gander or Shamwick, and you'll be given the secondary frequencies to use for that airspace, and that's coming up in the next oceanic control area if you're flying into another oceanic control area. And you will give the longitudinal position where you'll call the next OCA traffic center. So if you're going from east to west, so you're going from Europe to the US, you'll be talking to Shamwick first. Give you the secondary frequency for Shamwick, and then 30 West will tell you what frequencies to use to contact Gander. And that's pretty much it. And there'll be a check of the cell call system, which I'll explain a bit later. And that's basically used to alert, like a chime to alert pilots, so they don't have to have the HF radio turned up with all the associated noise and everything. So this could be an exchange today. So Air Canada 869 calls Gander. So Gander comes back, Air Canada 869, Gander radio, HF primary 616 in kilohertz, secondary 2899, Shamwick next. At 30 West, contact Shamwick radio, HF primary 8891, secondary 4675, standby for cell call check. And then you have the bing bong of the cell call chimes. Sounds like a bit of an like you get at the airport gates, say please go to gate number or whatever. It's a similar sound. And the plane comes back. Air Canada 868, cell call OK. HF primary 5616, secondary 2899, repeating what the controller said, basically. Pretty simple. And that would be the only contact that aircraft would make across that oceanic control area, unless, say, they wanted different levels or maybe divert from weather. Even that's pretty much done with data link these days. The thing is, you can still get position reports across the North Atlantic. It's mainly by aircraft which don't that much. So they don't have the equipment, they don't have the control pilot data link and that sort of stuff. So they will still give verbal position reports. So you still be here now and again. Okay. So looking at the HF radio world in terms of air traffic control, you'll notice here this is a pretty old chart, but it's still reasonably accurate. The world is divided up to a number of what are called major world route areas, and the NAT, the North Atlantic, is the one that we deal with. So that's between us and the Americas, basically. And there's CAR, which is the Caribbean and the east coast of the USA. That's Caribbean A, which I was talking about before. There's one of them. So you can just see that in the Gulf. The CAA, you can just see the Gulf of Mexico there. And then you've got stuff that's controlling the Pacific, and also you look at Africa and the Middle East. Africa, I think, is still reasonably active. The Middle East is mostly VHF, so I understand it. So it's really only the oceanic areas that you'll get VHF. You'll have HF being used these days. Okay. Just something with there's essentially the area of the globe which is covered by NAT on that, North Atlantic. Which goes from the equator between Africa and South America right up to the pole, and you see those areas controlled by Burdu in Norway and Reykjavik in Iceland. And you can see also Gander and Shanwick. The more southerly routes are handled by New York and Santa Maria in the Azores. So it's a bit of a funny setup. You've got various NAT A through to NAT F. And you see that map below. Some of these areas overlap. NAT A, you can see that's a fairly big area. Aircraft going between Europe and the Caribbean will go through that. So I should say NAT A and all these NAT areas will have specific frequencies allocated to them. Although they don't always do that. They drop and change the frequencies around a bit. But you find NAT A is the more southerly routes. NAT F is you can see it's a bit sort of northerly, so that goes between Gander and Shanwick. NAT E between the Azores and New York, and I think NAT D, which I think is the most interesting, covers the north area towards the North Pole, which does mean some interesting listening. Generally, NAT B and C that cover the real trunk routes. You sort of your London Heathrow to New York JFK type routes, which are the most popular, most densely applied routes as well. Like I said, some of these areas cross over. You'll notice certainly if you look at the African ones, there are lots of these so-called families, and that doesn't mean they're operating that much. You've got, in Africa, they certainly used to have about 20 of these families, but only a few are operative at one time. The most busiest one in Africa is Senegal, which is really oceanic. Stuff from Brazil through to Europe will travel through its airspace, and that can actually get quite busy. Okay. So it's a bit of a challenge when we've got no radar. Oh. How about that? How about that? Is that right? Hello, can you? Sorry, I was just sorting out some audio. You can hear that? Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, you've got no radar. You've got 2,500 flights a day. So it's a bit hard for planes to not bump into each other. And the other thing is the traffic volume's not really evenly spread out through the day either. So they can bunch at particular times. So what you have, you get a surge in US aircraft from Europe in the early morning, in the early afternoon UK time. One way, and coming back the other way, it's in the early hours in UK time. From about 1 in the morning, you start to see the front forward. You're going to Gander's airspace across towards Ireland and the UK. One way of doing this so it's going to avoid each other, certainly laterally, it's a lateral separation, is to set a number of tracks, dedicated tracks with set waypoints from start to finish across the Atlantic. Now, certainly all those tracks seems to be 6. I think there's at least 6 of these every day these days. They used to be all separated by 60 nautical miles. Some of these days, particularly the busier tracks, that can go down to 30 nautical miles, depending on the equipment that we are on the aircraft. So here we have this is the westbound tracks from Shamrock through to Chambers Airspace, and these are valid and set by Shamrock, Westwick, and they're valid from 11:40 Zulu GMT to evening time, 1900 Zulu. And so that would cover the morning to early afternoon surge that you get from Europe. And then going the other way, the Canadians at the centre in Gander will set the tracks that they're active between 1 a.m. and 8 a.m. What you'll find is that the tracks going from west to east will be close to the equator, which is not necessarily the shorter route because they want to avoid the jet stream. So that's so they don't the tracks don't always repeat themselves. What's set by Gander isn't always be replicated by Shamrock even on the same day. Okay, so here's the selective calling I was talking about. And what happens here is that in order for the crew to not have their HF radio, the volume turned up, hear all the noise, they can have the volume turned down, and if the oceanic control area want to talk to them, there'll be a set of chimes that the centre will send to the aircraft, and they're called cell call chimes, selective calling. So there'll be a pair of chimes, basically audio tones, and a special machine in the aircraft will pick them up. It's a sort of bing bong sound, and so the chimes will trigger a particular decoder in the aircraft, and that will alert the crew to turn up their volume on their HF radio. Nothing new to this. I mean, this has been around since the 50s in the AM days, and in fact, the signal is an AM signal. It's not. You do see the carrier, as I'll show in a minute. So what generally happens if it's commonly used, I guess more in the era of data link and all that sort of stuff, if pilots want to request a change in altitude or a change in route while they're over the ocean, the controller, or in the case of Shamrock, the radio operator will say they'll say that they'll get back to them at some point with their request, see if it's a yay or nay, and that could be a number of minutes. So in the meantime, the crew can they can turn back down the volume of the HF radio and save some of their sanity, basically. And as I was saying before, a lot of the transatlantic radio traffic these days will actually just relate to cell call checks and giving pilots the frequencies to use, and not much else. The reason they check it is because if the cell call is found not to work, or not to trigger the aircraft's decoder, the pilots will have to have the volume turned up for the whole journey across, which is something they really don't want to do, the so-called listening watch, which is absolutely hated by pilots. So what happens with cell call? Here's an example. Here's every aircraft, basically every airframe has a cell call attached to it if they want one. It's not related to the flight number. It's actually related to the airframe and the airframe itself. So here you have a New Zealand one in the aircraft ZK JNC, and the cell call is EPAM. And so whatever flight, wherever that's going, that will use that cell call code. And the thing on the bottom right is a cell call encoder, which is used by places like Shamwick in order to type in the cell call of the aircraft they want to contact and send the chimes. Thing is, and this has become a bit of a problem, the codes are often shared between 2 or more aircraft. And you think, well, hang on, well, there's 26 letters of the alphabet, you've got 4, and you've got 4 letters there, so that should mean, 26 by 26 by 26, blah, 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 combinations. Unfortunately, it's not that, not the case. Because what you've got with cell call, certainly the way it's set up now, only 16 letters of the alphabet are used. The same letter can't be used twice, and the higher letter in each of those two, like EPAM, each of those two components can't be, the higher letter can't be used first. So if it's EP, it can't be PE, all this sort of stuff. Mainly because those things are being sent at the same time. So you're really limited to about 11,000 aircraft, but I'll talk about that in a sec. Just some details about the modulation type. It's on upper sideband. It's just on the same channels that you'd be tuning in on SSB, and also you can hear them on AM because there's a carrier produced, and it's been around since the 50s, so that's when the era of AM for aircraft communications, HF communications. The thing is as well, you can hear these chimes. It's not like CTCSS, for instance. For repeaters, you'll actually hear the chimes. They're above 300 hertz, and that's the whole point. Is that the pilots do hear the chimes. So, for example, each of the letters that are applicable for cell call will have a particular audio frequency attached to it. So you look at the cell call ASBK, for instance. The A will be a chime of 312 hertz. S will be 1479. For B, it'll be 346, and the K 794. Those tone frequencies are actually carefully selected so to avoid potential harmonics. So you don't have double. If alpha's on 312, there's not something on 324, 624 rather, that sort of stuff. And what happens, you have a chime, the first 2 letters, there's a chime for 1 second, there's a 2-second pause, and then the chimes for the other 2 letters come in, and then hence you get the bing bong sound. To your ears, it will sound in each of the phases. It'll sound like 1 tone each, but it's actually a combination of 2. So for ASBK, your ears will hear a single tone of about 900 hertz. Was really it's 2 tones, one of 312, one of 1479, and obviously your ear averages that. But an audio spectrum analyzer will split them up no problem. So, for example, here's a scale. This could be it's essentially half a USB passband, and there's the first set. Bing bong. Do that again. So there's the AS. And then the BK 2.2 of a second later. And that's how you'd see it on an analyzer. Just quickly, with the cell call, I mean, cell call, certainly I'll talk about Flight Radar 24 and how to know which aircraft's which when they give their flight number and all that sort of stuff. But this, in order to determine the actual registration of the aircraft that you're listening to, you'd actually use the cell call code that was used, and that was the way of getting the aircraft's tail number effectively. And you can look them up on the website there, RZ Jets, which is quite useful. But as I'll talk about later, Flight Radar 24 has put that out to pasture a bit in terms of knowing registrations. So just look at, if you want to decode cell call chimes yourself, I mean, you can do it. I mean, the good thing is that most controllers all the controllers in the areas that I've listened to will actually give you the 4 letters, or will actually say the 4 letters. Now, there was a time for a while at least where the Shamwick controllers wouldn't. They just say, here comes your cell call, and bing bong. And if the pilots heard it, they heard it. If they didn't, they didn't. But they're back to actually saying the 4-letter code, so you can just copy that down. But if you want to listen to cell call directly, you can use an audio spectrum analyzer. So there's plenty of those around for PCs and smartphone apps. And you just see the lines across the analyzer, and it tells you what frequencies they are. Or I mean, there's not much decoding software out there. The only thing I can think of is what's called multi-PSK, which is actually a Digimode software, but includes a thing to decode cell call. It's a Digimode suite, sort of a bit like FL Digi or HRD, Ham Radio Deluxe. The other thing, I mean, if you've got something like an IC7300 or anything with a spectrum analyzer, you can actually use that to pick up the cell call chimes. So here, this is listening to, I'm guessing it's probably Shamwick on 6622 kilohertz, and a cell call chime has come through. So here there's a carrier. Remember that this was from back in the AM days. This came out. So even if you don't have SSB, you just have an AM receiver, you can still pick these things up. So the first 2 tones, in this case F and H, are below because the waterfall's going top to bottom. And then the second ones, which is G and P I've written there, coming through. And you'll hear those quite distinctly. Yeah, again, they're audio frequencies within human range. Okay. Now the problem is with when you've only got the 16 tones, as it has been the case since the 50s, you can only produce a bit less. You could produce less than 11,000 codes, except there are 37,000 aircraft which use cell call, or at least have a code. So it's quite a good chance that you'll double up. I mean, they try and have sort of aircraft like an aircraft 737, which just flies domestic routes in Australia, for instance, will have a particular cell code, and they'll share that with say an A320 or something like that, which just flies in the Middle East. But occasionally they do come across, and I did hear one the other day, and it caused a lot of confusion. Now the answer is that they want to do this for a while. And so that will cover most of the remainder of the alphabet. There are still a few letters missing, but each number except 0 will be included. So here have the added tones listed there, and you'll notice that one thing you'll notice that they're squeezed into the same roughly 1500 hertz passband.
basic equivalent to half of a USB passband. They haven't actually expanded the band, they've just squished them in a bit more. But with equipment these days, you know, it's much better than it was in the 50s, so they can get away with it now. Now, this system was supposed to have come into being in the last couple of years, but with COVID and all that other malarkey, it's been delayed. So it looks like maybe this year's the time it will come, particularly in the big airspace areas like NAT. But we'll see. Okay, so how do you sort of listen to the air traffic yourself? The equipment you need, at least, is a shortwave radio with the ability to receive single sideband. Just have to be wary of stuff on the market. There's a lot of cheap shortwave radios around, you know, with digital displays and that sort of stuff. But some of them don't have SSB. You have to watch out for that. They'll only have AM, FM, those sorts of things. And the other thing to watch out for is that some SSB capable receivers aren't always the most stable, or they require that, or they may be stable, and they may require an offset to the published frequency in order to hear them properly. And that's certainly the case in my experience with the Upatero MBT scanners. Like there's a 9000 one there, and also common ones are 7100, and I've got one of those, and that seemed to drift all over the place. But for what you got, and it was 30 years old technology, it wasn't bad. Nice and sensitive too. This is something I recommend if you want a standard basic standalone receiver for this. Is the Texan PL990X, and it's one of these sort of little travel radios. You know, it's got the alarm clock and all that sort of stuff in it. So if you're heading out to the Middle East or whatever, you can still listen to the BBC World Service and that sort of stuff. That's what they're made for. But this one does have SSB, and it is very sensitive and also very stable, unlike some of the cheaper ones you get. And this one here is, yeah, like I said, no frequency drift. Has an adjustable bandpass filter. So however you like to listen to SSB, you can be choosy. Pretty good noise reduction. A jog dial, which I think is a good thing if you want to just sort of flick through frequencies, and certainly without pressing too many buttons, you can just sort of spin the dial and it will take them through your memories. Something to remember as well with these types of radios, they're usually made for high impedance antennas, you know, long wires. And in this case, the jack for the antenna is 3.5 millimeters, not the usual BNC or something like that, which you'd expect for amateur use. And it's also 600 ohms. Again, really made for use for a long wire. So if you want to use an antenna which is made for 50 ohms, you know, you'll have to use an Anon or something like that. I mean, I've got a little one, made one, and that does the job. But you just got to remember to do that when you're buying these sorts of things. I think if you can get one with I mean, most of them will have memories, but if you have one with separate memory banks, and the reason why I say that is that it allows you to just scan the frequencies that you want at any particular time. Yeah, for example, if you may want to scan just through the lower end frequencies at night, but another air traffic control center might, yeah. So for example, this is a typical example would be you're listening to Shannon in the mid to late morning. They'll be on sort of 5 or 6 megahertz, whereas Gander will be on sort of 8.8, 8.9, maybe 11 megahertz. And to flick quickly between them, you'll have those sets of frequencies on different memory banks. It's just something that makes it a bit easier. You don't have to have it, but I find it a lot easier. Of course, you can just use your amateur HF rig, and they've got stored memory banks. Most of them have a continuum of received frequencies right from DC through to 50 megs or whatever. You just can't transmit on all this stuff, which is probably a good thing. The other thing, I think that certainly these days, the thing to get into really is software-defined radio. This is where the demodulation, all that sort of work is mainly done by a PC. And the good thing it gives you is a panoramic waterfall. You can see what's going on right across any particular frequency band, and just flick between any active station that you see lit up on the display. You can get some cheaper ones. Those on the market, just have to watch out. They're not very well filtered, and they can be overloaded very easily. So you look at the price range, like those ones, cheapy ones, RTL dongles you can get for 30 quid. Certainly SDR Play, which is a good receiver, you can get for as little as £100. The FunCube dongle, which is what I've got, and it's great. It's really portable. It is literally a dongle. Just plug it straight in. They're going for about 160. So these days, so there's plenty to choose from. Just have to beware. The cheap ones, particularly the filtering pre-selectors, aren't there, so they'll get overloaded quite easily from out-of-band signals. I think when you get more expensive ones, the wider you find that there's the wider the bandwidth, and also the better quality of the reception, and of course it's subject to your PC power as well. Just on antennas, you're looking for really good performance on the lower part of the HF spectrum and into the medium frequency spectrum. So really between 2.8 through to, well, below 14 megahertz. That's pretty much the HF world in terms of air radio. Now, what I like to do, I'd like the antennas I prefer are ones where I don't really have to retune if I change between bands. So I like change between 5.5 megahertz to 8.8 megahertz or 11.2 megahertz. And one of the antennas that does that is these active loops, external loops, are about 1 meter in diameter. The one I've got is the Wellbrook 1530, and it's just basically, it's got a little preamp. The signals are a bit low, but the preamp boosts them up. And generally, you'll find that the problem with most radios, they're too sensitive anyway, so a low signal's okay. But it's good signal noise performance. That's the main thing. And you can just flick it between various bands and don't bother having to retune. Just something on that. Just know the difference between these sort of bigger loops, which is sort of receiving loops, which are about a meter in diameter, with the small loops. Like you get, they're made to sort of be used internally, and they'll have a little sort of pre-selector thing on them, and they are really very sharp. And even if you tune a little bit up the band that you've chosen, you'll have to retune them. So, but if you just want to sit on the same frequency or thereabouts, they're great. But if you want to bounce between frequency bands, they're a bit of a nightmare. The other thing is a long wire, which is provided with things like the Texan PL 990, and they're great. It's better if you can retune them, but you don't really have to. You still get a reasonably good result if you just leave them be. Okay. The other thing, if you don't have your own SDR, you can always use someone else's. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot of SDRs, or the feed from SDRs that are available on the web for free, for nothing. And if you go onto this site, websdr.org, you'll find the list, and it'll give you the list of frequency ranges that it does, the locations, the antenna types, etc. And you can just pick the ones you like. You just have to remember with most of them, they don't have comprehensive airband coverage. In fact, very few do. One of the exceptions is the one at the University of Twente in Holland. In fact, that's the one right at the top of the list on that site. And that will give you basically DC through to 30 megs. So that will cover the entire airband continuously with no gaps. All they use is a little mini whip antenna, but it seems to do a really good job. And certainly for stuff in our region, the North Atlantic and the Middle East, it does give a good performance. I think certainly if you're going further west, if you want to listen to Gander or things in the Caribbean, there are ones available, STRs that do cover that. Just have to be aware that again you're not going to cover the whole HF airband on them. I mean, for instance, on one of them, I think it's K3 FVF, which is in a good position. It does cover, for instance, the 8.8 megahertz band of the HF airband, but only the top part of it. So it chops off some pretty decent frequencies, unfortunately. The other thing to do, and I use this to fill in the gaps sometimes as well, is a site called Live ATC, and that will have like certainly US or Canadian based receivers, and they'll tune into the popular NAT HF frequencies. So that's a sort of a bit of a missing link solution there. Yeah, I think the advantage of listening to these web SDRs is not just they may be better than what the equipment they've got to receive, but it's also the location. And you may think that Twente in Holland isn't that far away, but certainly in terms of if you want to listen to points to the east, for example, if you want to listen to an enormous amount of traffic that goes through the Arabian Gulf, that is the station to use, and it'll probably be better than what you've got here. And certainly you use the USA web SDRs if you want to go for the Caribbean, or for another, if you want to, there's another busy HF area which is between Hawaii and California, and if you listen to the web, there's some West Coast SDRs which will pick that up. That's a lot of traffic that goes between Hawaii and LA and Seattle and San Francisco, etc. Here's an example of the dashboard, I guess you call it, of Twente. You see that you've got the waterfall. It's actually in reverse, but the frequency display, and you see the little red circles. You can actually put memories of particular stations on there. The trick is to sort of have the waterfall display, so it's showing all the frequencies that you need, all the memories that you need on the one band without having to scroll. So if you see some activity like you see on I think it's 887-8906 there, you can just click straight onto that, and if it happens on another memory, click onto that, etc. And you can set the buttons below. You see that circle on the bottom left. You can set up your frequency bands. Each of those columns is on a different section of the HF band. So that first one is for 8.8 megahertz. The one in the middle is sort of 2.8, 2.9, etc. So, but that's something to think about yourself. Okay, there are the list of the bands, by the way. Okay, so if you want to monitor successfully, there's a few things that need to line up. Firstly, you want pretty high traffic levels, and you certainly get that across the Atlantic. You also want good conditions on the paths to the areas of the traffic, and also the responsible ground stations like Shamrock or Gander or Santa Maria, New York, etc. If you look at transatlantic traffic in particular, one of the good times, and this is when they set the tracks for, is Shamrock on mid-morning, and if you listen, just flick through between those four frequencies, you usually find two are going to be quite busy at any particular time. As you move into the afternoon, as the aircraft sort of move across the Atlantic and go into Gander's airspace, these are the frequencies to use. Again, this is the reason why you may want to put your memories in multiple banks. Okay, so you can say flick between 5.6 and 6.22 on one band, and go and maybe flick through the 8.811 meg band if you want to listen to Gander. There's quite a few frequencies to put in the memory, and you're flicking through a whole lot of them, which can be a bit counterproductive. Just another time, certainly in the winter, Shamrock will you'll notice the frequencies will drop because the sun's gone down in the afternoon, even to the west of Ireland, and the maximum usable frequencies drop, and hence the frequencies used by the controllers drops as well. So you're looking at the lower medium frequency signals, particularly those that I've highlighted there. They're the ones that have been used recently. Okay, I call it the graveyard shift. So this is where the aircraft coming from the US and Canada are saying to come across to Europe. So they're leaving northeast Canada and going out over the ocean in Gander's airspace. This is where they're generally on 5616, and when they move into Shamrock's airspace from 5649, that's been the pattern for a while now. Okay, just something, I mean, I touched on briefly, just the primary and backup or secondary frequencies that you hear. They're generally based on propagation predictions, and you'll find, I think, as we get more and more into towards sunspot maximum, you'll start to see, like Shamrock in the morning, even in the morning, will you be using a frequency like 8879, and Gander will be using 13306 or something like that instead of 11279. But yeah, it's just a matter of listening and seeing what's being used at the time, and you'll find that the aircraft, before they get into that next control area, will be advised what frequencies to use. So it's always good to listen. Just coming back to the mid-morning westward surge. Now that's obviously controlled by Shannon, but for the aircraft that are about to enter the oceanic airspace, they will be talking to Shannon high altitude en route control, and they will get the frequencies, the HF frequencies from there, and you can actually listen to that on liveatc.net. The other thing is you just flick through the frequencies, and you'll soon find them what the busy ones are. And the thing is, if for the stuff going into Gander, so they cross the line of 30 west, these will be given on the initial contact when they make initial contact with Shamrock. So as soon as they go from over Europe to Shamrock airspace, they'll be told these frequencies for Shannon and also for Gander on HF. So take note of those when you hear them. Okay. Now this is the thing that's really revolutionised this sort of subculture, and that's Flight Radar 24. So you can get this as through the web browser or through a phone app. And essentially it is just putting on a map the positions that are given by the ADS-B squitters from aircraft, through their GPS or their inertial navigation system, whatever they're using. And so, for example, here we've got Ice Air or Iceland Air 635, and you can see that circle on the map there. So it's a 737 going from Keflavik to Boston in America. But yeah, you'll notice that the different colours of the planes. Some of them are yellow, some of them are blue. The yellow ones are supposed to be detected by receivers on the ground. So that could be, I know Nigel G0RXA is receives the ADS-B at his location and puts it through the internet, and the information goes flight radar 24. So that would be an example of a ground detection. Now the blue is supposed to be detected by satellite. Now it seems weird, but there are all these yellow ones right in the middle of the ocean. I don't know how some ground receivers pick that up, but anyway, a plane's a plane, isn't it? So this will allow you to pinpoint aircraft that you hear. Certainly, with voice these days, they're not going to tell you the position. That will be through data link, and so the best thing to do is you can type in the aircraft flight number that you hear over the air, and it will give you information like on that banner here for this Iceland Air flight. So it'll be aircraft registration, which a lot of people want to take into account. Previously, you'd have to listen to the cell call chime and note that down and look that up, but you don't have to now. Just a bit of a trick. I mean, Nigel might want to have a word on this, but it can be a little bit quirky with some of the flights and the airlines. I mean, the example I've used is Swiss Air. Now, what they tend to, EasyJet and Ryanair does as well, but the quoted flight number will not actually match the flight number that the passengers are told they're on. So, for example, the other day there was Swiss Air 51 November. Now that is actually Swiss Air Flight 14, obviously. But the thing is, the idea if you use the 3-letter ICAO code for the airline instead of the 2-letter one and type in verbatim what you hear, that's probably the best way of doing it. So if you type in Swiss Air 51 to do SWR 51N, and that should come up with LX14, and it'll show the Swiss Air 51 November beside it in small letters, so you know it's correct. But if you typed LX51N, the LX being the 2-letter ICAO code for Swiss Air, you won't get anything. It's one of these things. I thought I'd mention it. It's just so you don't get disappointed if you can't find anything. The thing about the map, and certainly there's various levels that you can get flight radar 24. The more you pay, the better you get. Things like the flight information regions are shown, for example, or roughly shown. They don't exactly match the oceanic control areas, but good enough. So there's your Reykjavik, Gander, Shamrock, New York, and Santa Maria shown here, and the lines between them. It also shows you certainly for the gold version, where you pay some money or you feed some information to the site. It'll give you the NAT tracks when they're active. The waypoints are also shown. This is I think a bit of a weak part of Flight Radar 24. Things like the oceanic entry points, they're there, but you really have to zero right into them. Really zoom right in, which is a bit disappointing. They could make those a bit bigger, I think. Just showing on the particular map here. This was taken early afternoon in September. So did you see that yellow dotted line? That's sort of the front of the western bound wave of the morning. The leading edge of that western bound wave. going from Europe to the US, and obviously in Gander's airspace. So that was about 1 in the afternoon. But you can certainly see the surge, and you can see the aircraft on the tracks. Even if you don't have the tracks there, you'll soon work out where they are just by all these aircraft following each other. Okay, just lastly, just some interesting listening experiences that I've had, not necessarily on the North Atlantic routes, but one of the more interesting ones that you can get, certainly in the winter months, where the path is covered in darkness. And this is Mumbai radio, which covers the area really between India and the Arabian Peninsula, or the Arabian Sea, really. And there's lots and lots of traffic going from the Middle East to and from the Middle East hubs through to Southeast Asia and Australasia. And this is actually the traffic they're showing there is quite light, but that can just get chock-a-block. And I was actually on an aeroplane once in Dubai. No, it was Abu Dhabi. And at 10:30 at night, and we were grounded because there was too much traffic over Oman or something like that. It's just an enormous amount that goes through there now. And being that it flies a bit over the ocean, it uses HF. So good time to listen to it now, because all this area through to Europe in the early to mid-evening is dark, and you don't get the absorption. Good to listen through the University of 20 SDR, even though you may have a good equipment yourself. It's can't really be beat that for that frequency at that time. It's a little bit closer to it, and it's just a good receiver. No two ways about it. The other thing I like is, which seems a bit strange, it's for aircraft going from certainly Ireland and the west of Great Britain towards the Canaries and even towards Portugal, they will fly into oceanic airspace, even though they don't have to. And they'll avoid. The reason for this is that in order to avoid strikes by French air traffic controllers, and B, the charges by Eurocontrol flying in their airspace. So they'll actually fly right on the edge of the area, say for instance, controlled by the Brest in France, and as a consequence, they'll require HF radios. And here it is. Here it's pretty hard to tell, but you notice that map is sort of bordered by Spain at the bottom, France's end, and then Ireland. It's the western part of the Bay of Biscay into the Atlantic, and all that's over water, and so HF radio is required. So your standard, and they're called the Tango routes that they use. Tango 9 and Tango 290 are the ones closest to France. I think they're completely on VHF, but you do require HF radio planes do require that in order to use them. And a bit further to the west, and these go to the Canaries, T16, 13, and 2, and 2, 6, and 16 will be pure. They will be oceanic. You'll need data link and HF definitely, and you'll hear some of those talking to Shanwick. In fact, for the Tango 9 or Tango 290 route, I have heard aircraft over Portugal, so they're actually over land in VHF territory, will actually get clearance to use that, and they'll call Shanwick on HF for that. So you'll find that usually sometimes, certainly during the holiday periods on the weekend, late in the afternoon, early evening. But it makes for some interesting listening, and you can listen to the what do you call it, the Shannon en route control VHF through liveatc.net, and you can listen to them on VHF as well. So something a bit different, and I find going to be quite interesting. Anyway, that's it.
Do we have any questions for Evan? I can see somebody raising their hand.
Evan, Tom here.
Hang on. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, what proportion of the traffic is conducted now on data compared with using voice? Roughly, will it be like 50-50 or 25-75?
For the Atlantic, North Atlantic, so it's Gander and Shanwick, I would say it'd be 95%. Most of the aircraft that do the Atlantic like this Delta 76, the control pilot data link.
Data link, right. Okay.
So yeah, and just quickly, yeah, the people will be ones which probably to between America and vice versa. They won't be flying oceanic stuff very much, so they don't need that equipment. So they'll be given that verbal.
Okay.
I think what I would say as well is that you still find a lot of military stuff crossing the Atlantic, certainly the moment, and you see quite a few of the C-17s of the USAF traveling across to Europe, and vice versa. Plus, there's a lot of exchange of the tankers, the KC-135 tankers that are maintained at Mildenhall, and there is a swap of those quite regularly. So it's always worthwhile keeping an ear on those kind of frequencies to see what's taking place military-wise. And I think if you to look at a map of Europe, certainly around the Ukraine area, you'll see tankers all the time flying up and down the borders, just keeping an eye as to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was actually going to comment when we had the G7 down here in Cornwall. Before it and after it, it was quite amazing. It was like the London Underground with a number of military flights leaving from Newquay and doing a swift right hand and going across to the States. And some of them had amazing call signs that were clearly made up by the crew or something, the military stuff, but they had some really interesting call signs.
I mean, usually when the president is over here, obviously he comes in Air Force One, but you can find there's about 2 or 3 or 4 other ones carrying all the secret police kind of people, keeping an eye on. Yeah. Not forgetting the mobile McDonald's.
for the G7 at one stage, I think somebody said there were 32 military transports on the ground at Newquay from the States.
That's it. Speaking of Newquay, have you had any signs of the Mr. Branson's new aeroplane down there? Because he has been doing a few test flights from Newquay recently.
I haven't seen or heard anything. I don't know whether it's a cardboard cutout or what, but I am in 1 or 2. I haven't seen anything, and I do follow 1 or 2 things over there on Facebook, so I'll have to have another look.
It certainly did a test flight. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, just before Christmas. It was flying up and down between Ireland and Tenerife, I think it was, and then obviously went back into Newquay. So it's something worth keeping an eye on, because I think he is doing some tests, and he's virtually ready to go with one of his launches, I think.
Yeah, well, there's certainly plenty of real estate down there. It's the reason it's chosen. It's one hell of a runway.
Mm.
Yeah, well, but with it being a military base, it is, it's quite long, isn't it, as far as that is concerned? Because that's where the maritime force used to be based at one time.
Yeah, it was also one of the alternates for the space shuttle. Sadly, it was never used. but it was an alternate, so it's a lot of tarmac.
Absolutely. And I'd agree with what Evan mentions as far as listening on the web SDR. I use that quite frequently. And certainly a frequency of 8879 is worthwhile listening to at this time of night, because you can quite easily see stuff crossing the Indian Ocean out towards between places like Dubai and India. It's well worth it.
Just a random aside. I happen to know this because I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I do know that when small aircraft are flying over the Atlantic, they generally have to relay through larger aircraft because obviously they're flying much slower. So that's the way I know they do that.
Yeah, I mean the interesting one is now there's a question went back a few years ago because traditionally you'd have 4-engine aeroplanes crossing places like the Atlantic and the Pacific and places like that. But now when you look at the aeroplanes that are actually being used across, they're all twin-engine aeroplanes. There's very, very few multi-engine aeroplanes crossing. So it's an interesting scenario that, I think it was the Americans that brought in the ETOPS requirements. I can't remember what ETOPS stood for. Go on.
Engines turn, all passengers swim.
All right. Okay. Yeah. I've got
Twin populations over the sea.
Yep, that's right. And the Americans brought that in a few years ago to basically allow twin-engine aeroplanes to fly between the west coast of the States and Hawaii. And they needed to be at least 3 hours away from a suitable diversion airfield. So that's why, to some extent, you'll now see more twin-engine aeroplanes flying across the Atlantic than you will see multi-airplanes. And they are much cheaper, yeah.
It's actually all down to system reliability, though. That's the main thing.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I think it was the Canadians who pioneered this stuff over. Wanted to use their 767s, which obviously twin-engined. But before that, you had the 747s, DC-10s, TriStars. They were all at least 3 engines. Passenger jet.
When 3 engines do still exist is in the small business jet market.
Before you include the
where
MT,
it's cheaper to have 3 engines than the top expensive aircraft.
Yeah. Dassault Falcon is one. Yeah. But there's still a fair number of airplanes. For those that you're following us, I don't think Evan can see the vlog. Your machine is on there, but we're now following the airplanes going across the Atlantic. And there are still quite a few heading across and a few coming back as well. Indeed.
Yeah.
Avoiding Europe.
Switching this back to radio a little bit, the route in the summer, not now, but the route down to the Canaries, even now you can see there we go, quite a lot of stuff coming up. The route down to the Canaries, for playing radio was actually very useful. In the summer, there was such a density of aircraft going in both directions that I did some playing around with multi-aircraft hop on 2 meters, monitoring the GB3 MCB beacon. And you could copy the GB3 MCB beacon down in the Canaries for quite a lot of the time during peak aircraft movements, because we assumed it was multi-aircraft scatter. It certainly wasn't Freddie G.
Right.
Quite rightly.
Just purely out of interest, I've just highlighted an airplane. That's Mr. Branson's 747 there. November 744 Victor Golf. And that's his launch plane. I can't remember. It's given one of the usual names. I can't remember its name now, but it's still there at UK.
Yeah.
So keep your ears open.
Is that for his space?
Yeah. Is it Virgin Galactic?
Yeah,
Virgin Galactic, isn't it?
yeah. Hence the VG. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Virgin Orbit.
That's the one.
Oh.
That's the one. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, he's supposed to be getting round to launching his first, whatever it's going to be, isn't it? But just going back to what you were quoting about flight numbers and call signs, there's quite a few of them on this map. And obviously you've got this EasyJet, which I've got highlighted, which is probably heading to somewhere like Glasgow or something. But they tend to use call signs now as opposed to flight numbers because they are able to have a stored flight time. So they pull it out of the system when that flight is taking place. There's an Emirates 380 heading across as well. We're using a similar call sign. Of course, that would be nothing related to the flight number.
Again, that's the trick. Sorry, again, that's the trick that you have to remember when putting stuff into Flight Radar 24 is the flight number quoted by air traffic control is not what's advertised in the timetable. A lot of the time, yeah, like with that Emirates flight, with that EasyJet one that you're seeing there.
Echo X-ray Sierra 95 Lima is going to Leeds. It says on my Flight Radar 24.
It's funny actually because Leeds is one of the places that becomes fog bound fairly easily because it's on top of a hill and it's on a plateau. And invariably at this time, when the weather is suitably, or the way it is, so that fog will form, Leeds is usually the first place to go down.
Well,
and of course, they'll all come trooping across the Pennines to us.
Yeah, it's come from Tenerife.
Right. Okay. So, any more questions for Evan before he disappears?
Well, he's going to play radio.
Okay. Actually, he's gone counter the money, so he's doing his right job, should we say? Tony, are you with us? No, you're not with us.
should be.
Right, you're with us now.
Yep. Oh, with you.
You're too loud.
You're too low.
Come on.
Loud.
How's that?
You're too
Not loud.
loud.
Too loud.
I'll turn it down anymore. I'll be off.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah, Evan's counted the money up. I don't know if you can see it or not, but if you turn one of the cameras round, does it pick it up there?
And that's it. Which one do you want?
No, that's my age 21.
Are you down in Cornwall then, Peter?
Can you see it? I don't know if you can see that or not. This is my start off for QO100 system.
Oh, very nice.
Woohoo!
That's the LMB and the potty antenna all mounted there. Unfortunately, the ground station is held up at Birmingham with customs. Why, I don't know, because all the relevant paperwork was issued by DX Patrol, and they're chasing it now. But that's that with the cables. The cables are already there, all cabled up, ready for the receiver. Once I've got that, that's up and running. All it needs then is 12 volt. Well, the 12 volt supply is actually within the ground station to power everything. Everything's from there. So all we've got is 3 leads from the sat dish onto the ground station, and then 1 from the ground station, which is the IF, onto the radio. And once that's done, I'll be up and running, hopefully. Of course, as Peter will agree, what I've got to do is, once it's up, we've got to find the satellite. Otherwise, it's no use if you can't find it. But that's the start of my system, which is what we're pushing for the trustees to fund for the club, and then we can use it. Both use it here and use it at events as well.
Fucking
Brilliant.
smart.
What size is that dish?
The dish is 60 centimetre.
Right. Okay. It's you're not going to be loud then.
No. No, we didn't want too much game, Peter, on account of taking it out to events, and it'll be up to a lot fairly
Yeah.
low level.
Yeah. That's right. I've done, as you know, a few portable events on National Trust property, and
Yeah.
you know, as long as you're sort of 2 or 3 meters away from it, even if you walk in front of it, it's nowhere near the danger levels. But if you want to demonstrate the danger levels, if even with a couple of watts, if you put your hand close to that feed, the brass feed there, if you put your hand in front of that, your hand will get warm,
Oh, yeah.
even with 2 watts.
So it'll be all right. So if the coffee's getting cold, I can put it in front of there, reheat it.
Yeah, we did have. I did a demonstration at my other radio club, at Callington Radio Club, just before Christmas, and we actually played around and warmed a mince pie. We had to take it out of its. There were bought ones, and we had to take it out of its foil hat, but we warmed a mince pie.
Nice one. See, this system's got multi-purposes. Multi-purposes.
That reminds me, actually, there was I was watching a YouTube video fairly recently, and they were talking about how they were experimenting. Specifically, one scientist was experimenting with using microwaves to defrost people, especially animals. They were doing it on animals, and it was James Lovelock. It was actually commissioned by the government to try and they'd freeze an animal solid, and then they'd fire, specifically microwaves, at it to try and defrost it. And in one case, I think they succeeded.
I don't think that we'll have enough power to cook anybody with this once at the event. So that's the idea of keeping it low power. It could be. Yeah. I mean, we could actually get to the amplifier and put the amplifier in for booster transfer. I think the amplifier boosted to about 12 watts. Am I right, Peter?
Yeah, if you've got the whatever it's called, the ground station, is it the simplex one or the duplex one?
I've ordered a simplex one.
Yeah, well that's got a built-in 10 or 12 watt amplifier, so you know you'll be fine with that. You'll be working stuff, and well, as long as customs release it before the end of March, you'll work the rarest of the rare with FT8WW. He was on again today on SSB, chatting away on the satellite, whilst the rest of the world's trying to work him on HF. So that's a once in a lifetime opportunity, because it's it's a research island and you don't get there very easily very often.
Yeah. Well, I've got DX Patrol on the case now with them, because it's I ordered and paid for this at the beginning of December, and it's been in DPD have had it since the 24th of December. Before the 24th of December, it hasn't moved.
Yeah.
So I've got them on the case now, chasing it, see what's happened to it. But according to Antonio there, all the relevant paperwork and documentation was sent off with it.
Yeah.
They aren't exactly known for their reliability nowadays, though, Tony, to be fair. I was once working on the other side of the Pennines, had to get something delivered to me, and they attempted to deliver it to a car park.
Oh, DPD haven't even attempted to deliver it yet. It's still in their international sortation place down in Birmingham.
All right, so you'll never see it then.
That's what they're telling us anyway. So it's a case of, are they right, are they wrong? We'll soon find out anyway if DX Patrol get onto them, because they sent it out. Occasionally, see, with these couriers, they won't speak to the receiver; they'll only speak to the sender to get the details. So I've left it in their capable hands now. See how we go on with it. I'm just hoping get it before Easter.
Where's it come from?
Portugal.
Portugal.
Oh, that's one of the Brexit benefits.
It's coming direct from DX Patrol.
One of the Brexit benefits. Tom, you're a pistol.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Who voted for Brexit?
You've been talking to Dave again, haven't you, Tom?
Absolutely.
I'll show you. I'll show you what Brexit has done. There's no word of a lie. This is after a year of travel as well. Okay. These are-
Passports and stamps.
Let's listen to this after a year of travel.
Wow.
And each one of those represents a delay that wasn't there before.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's bragging rights. You can show off that, can't you?
No, you say that, but at certain airports, that delay was always there. They're just hiding behind the stamp now.
Yeah.
We got a full screen out for the person talking because it's not on the main screen here. Because you've got the link. You've got the HDMI cable in your little laptop.
But I'm not
Doesn't matter. No, you can't put it. You can't put it full screen for the recipients, can you? Yes, you can.
Do you know, technology.
Just double click on it.
Brilliant, aren't
Double
they?
click on the person speaking. Double click on Peter.
I didn't speak.
Full screen.
I'm speaking. You're speaking. but Peter wasn't.
Don't matter. Oh well, you've been demoted, haven't you?
I've been demoted. Oh, there we are.
You've been demoted. That's what it is.
Whereabouts in Cornwall are
Just
you,
a question, Peter. They recommend putting the a plastic bag over the transmitter receiver.
Yeah.
I take it that's just like a thin, one of these thin food bag type things, nothing thick at all over.
I tell you what I use is a Tupperware around, but what we're trying to say here, a Christmas pudding shaped bowl
Oh,
in
yes.
Tupperware.
Hmm.
It has to be a clear one, not a dark coloured
Right.
one, because the dark coloured ones tend to. It has to be one
So
that doesn't get hot if you put it in the microwave for obvious reasons. But some people,
I can hear him.
can you hear me okay? Yeah. Some people just use a 2 litre lemonade bottle cut in half.
All right. Mm-hmm.
Hey, yeah, please.
We've got a technicality here. Tony's trying to talk to you, like, but he's unplugged the speaker. Have another
It was
go.
buzzing, wasn't it?
I can use semaphore if you want.
Well, that's the way we started out, didn't we? You know, we started with 4, didn't we?
I'm all right, Peter. Just a thin plastic bag over it, like a food bag.
Yeah, that'll work fine. Yeah, anything that doesn't get hot in the microwave will work fine. But if you want something more substantial, then take a 2 litre lemonade bottle and cut it in half and put that over. Or, as I say, what I use for a slightly more permanent solution is a Christmas pudding shaped Tupperware thing with a lid, and you can cut the lid with scissors so that the Tupperware, the pudding basin is upside down, if you like, on the front of the dish.
Yeah.
And that works really well. They only last about 6 months in sunlight, and then they go all brittle and fall off.
Right.
Yeah.
It will be an easy height where I can get at it to change it. It's just trouble is we didn't get a Christmas pudding this year.
Useless.
Plenty of lemonade bottles though.
Yeah, yeah.
Plenty of lemonade bottles to do those. I think it's primarily the pot isn't it to protect.
Yeah, yeah. It just keeps the water off, you know, and you will find if you do that, if you get very heavy rain, the downlink signal will fade on you, just as Sky TV used to do back in the days when it was analog. Now it just drops out and pixelates if you get a bad storm.
We live in Manchester, of course there'll be very heavy rain.
Well,
No, we don't have heavy rain in Manchester. We just have downpours. It's just have downpours. We're
It's heavy drizzle.
all getting web feet in Manchester.
Not here, I don't live in a valley. Whereabouts in Wall are you, Peter?
Just in Cornwall, about 25 miles west of Plymouth, between between Looe and Foy on the southeast Cornwall.
All right, okay, fair enough. I was in St Ives in August.
Oh right.
Very nice. We, as I say, I activated Carby Bay Beach for BOTA this year. I got one QSL.
You're welcome to St Ives and what have you in August. That's 1 month I don't go.
Nice actually. Very nice. Lovely time.
Have I been?
And just look. What's going on?
Is that your shack there, Peter?
Sorry?
Is that your shack there?
Yeah, the scruffy corner, yes.
I was going to say, it looks a bit like a laundry. Yeah, that rack above your head.
Oh, it's a no, it's an XRAF radar container.
Ah,
Can I just let me see if I can pick me thingy up. That's the work. It's a mess basically. This is the workshop, not really the shack. So, I'll make you seasick. This is where all the junk gets stored. So there you go.
Mine's the same at the minute. Peter, mine's exactly the
Quickie.
same. My workshop's over there. My radio is currently here, but he's moving over there. The computer's here. I've got a 3D printer in that corner. I've got various rubbish there. I've got musical equipment over there. Ridiculous.
Just before we close down, we've got a request from one of our members. Well, it's not a member of ours actually, but we've had a request. He's selling all his equipment. 3 items of equipment are an FT5000, an FT891, and an amplifier. If anyone wants to talk, give me a call. Let me know what it is. There's no price on it yet. He contacted me before Christmas, and with me being ill before Christmas, I had a chance to get back to him. But his name is M0 MSD, and lives in Hanford. So if anyone's interested, let me know, and I'll give you his contact details. Thank you very much, Chief, for attending tonight. It's been a pleasure to see somebody at the house here, and those virtual. And thanks for your attention, Evan. Although he does babble on a bit. Yeah. He likes to think sure so he can get the subs sorted out. Thanks a lot, everyone. Happy New Year to everyone who I've spoken to before. And stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much, Tony.
yeah. Bye bye, Tony. Take care.
Bye,
everybody. Cheers.